Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagano, and welcome back for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa's favorite conservative podcast. We are here in Studio 130 this afternoon with everyone's favorite John Hendrickson and also with Chris Ingstead.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
John did come prepared today. He's got the Hillsdale College notepad with copious notes. Is that the same ones from last time?
No,
these are brand new.
These are brand new notes.
Okay, good. I actually brought things today. So we're going to start. First of all, how are you doing today, John?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
Yeah.
Do you know why he's grinning? He's grinning because there's an article sitting in front of him, and just by judging by the headline, it's one he could have written himself. It also looks like it was in the Wall Street Journal, John.
Yeah, it was this morning. Yeah.
I'm recognizing the right font there, and it just says "In defense of the Trump trade policy." Goodness. So I guess it'll be interesting here when John tries to tell us who wrote it.
Yeah.
I guess we'll find out what John's nom de plume is here.
Right.
Yeah.
So who is your Pierre Delecto name?
Well, this is
was it Pierre or Peter?
This was
I can't remember.
Letter to the editor, and it was written by my favorite, my new hero, Robert Lighthizer.
Oh, okay.
Former U.S. trade ambassador.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you should write Mr. Lighthizer and tell him how much you appreciate it.
Yeah. In fact, I wanted to cut this out of our paper, but we didn't get it today.
Oh my goodness.
So
What's going on?
Well,
okay. Well.
And then the second letter, the editor, was another great one. It was written in defense of the steel industry by the president of the American Iron and Steel Institute.
You sure this isn't from like the historical archives of the?
No,
this isn't from like the 1920s or something, and like you. That's where
this
it's
is just as
in
good.
This morning's journal.
I think these things are both from actually John's drafts file. These are both articles John has already written.
Fantastic. Well, I wanted to jump off today with a new segment, which we've done. John's what did John get in the mail? Mm-hmm. And whatever pieces of historical memorabilia he's gotten. I got a whole bunch of stuff in the mail.
I did too.
Yesterday.
I got some of that stuff.
I actually brought it in, and I thought we could just go over it.
Yeah.
And I think you guys, because what I want to do today is talk about the presidential race, which obviously we've spent quite a bit of time on, but and kind of dig in a little bit on some of the issues, because we've tried to do that on tax policy, but what are the candidates actually talking about out there? So the first one maybe isn't even presidential stuff, but John and you and I were talking about this a little bit in the pre-production meeting. I got I guess a fundraising letter with petitions from the National Right to Work Committee, and it was ostensibly authored by Senator Rand Paul. I think he's always been big on right to work. Petitions to Senator Ernst, Congressman Nunn, Senator Grassley, McCarthy, McConnell, so on and so forth. But I asked you, do you think that right to work is still a hot issue in Iowa?
I don't think it's a hot issue right now, but I do think it's still important to many Iowans. Mm-hmm. But we were talking before we started the program about, I grew up in a state that was very strong union, and then coming to Iowa, it was certainly a different atmosphere in terms of unions and labor, and so I think you don't hear a lot of people talking about that issue. I think if there was an attempt with, if Iowa Democrats ever decide to, if they ever get control of state government and maybe
if they ever decide to win majorities.
Yes, if that ever happens,
it's a choice they can make,
and they try to maybe overturn right to work,
right?
Then I think it becomes a hot issue. But right now, I would say no.
Yeah, I remember that was a big deal back in 2009. Wow, that those 4 years of that Democrat trifecta in there, and there were several, labor bills that went through there, and right to work became defending that became a big issue in Iowa. Go ahead, and then I got another thing for you on that issue, Chris.
What did the legislature pass, or was prepared to pass, but the governor wouldn't sign off on?
Wasn't prevailing wage. That's the one that failed on the floor in the House. It was before I got elected, I think. And I think they may have gotten, was it employee choice, a doctor?
I thought it was, you know what? We're going to
Yeah.
We're going to skip out my
yeah.
bad memory and just keep moving. Okay.
Well,
but I mean, John's point is valid, and past legislative action would show this is anytime you maybe flip control, the incoming majority are going to have issues they want to run that are important to their base. And now, I guess maybe the question that we're asking, John, is right to work important to the base of the Democrat Party in Iowa or not? And I don't.
There's a big question I think we could probably spend a whole episode on as changing pieces of the coalitions of each of these two parties as Republican. We're going to get to this later, John, as the Republican Party becomes more populist, more blue collar. And
not if Mike Pence has his way, it won't.
That's right. And as Democrats become much more the party of big business and all of that it's shifting a little bit on some of that.
It'd be interesting.
But I guess I was thinking too. One of our counterpart organizations in the country in Tennessee spearheaded an effort to actually put right to work into their state constitution, which is a really heavy lift. But the point being is that, life can come at you fast, and preserving these things in the Constitution can sometimes be very important. And we're not necessarily proposing to do the same thing in Iowa right here, but there are other constitutional protections that we would like to pursue in Iowa. And we're going to be working on that next year. So very good. I also got, and I haven't even opened this yet, I wanted to save and do it with you guys. I got a proposed. Do you ever get like a membership card for a certain organization? They sort of pre-print it for you in the mail.
Yes.
I got one from Planned Parenthood.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and it's not addressed to my wife. It's addressed to me. So they have targeted me as a potential member, and they've even pre-printed my membership card for me.
That's great, Chris.
So I don't know if somebody signed me up for this. I got a bumper sticker with it.
Oh,
Wow.
Supreme Court justices, the whole bit. So anyway. I was kind of curious. My wife took a picture of that and sent it to me when it arrived in the mail yesterday. She's like, how'd this come here?
So I didn't get that membership card, by the way.
Yeah.
I did get the Rand Paul letter. I got a couple of those. The funny thing is we sent our daughter up to get the mail, and she comes back empty-handed, and we asked, what's the deal? She's like, well, it was all junk mail. I threw it away. And I'm like, well, let's take a look at that and see. So,
you ever seen the 1980s movie Better Off Dead with John Cusack?
Of course.
No.
Yeah, and the mailman that's, it's famous, that he's wants his $2, but he's always just like fumbling the mail and spilling it all over the place. I always think about that. Okay.
I remember the mailman from Funny Farm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was in on it.
Yeah.
He was helping him by the end.
Yeah. There's also one, I don't know what the movie is, with Ralphie May as the mailman who's just always like getting into it with everyone he delivers mail to, and it's a really good time. Anyway, okay, didn't plan on going there.
On to the presidentials like you wanted.
Okay, so we're getting all kinds of mail, and I thought that both of these mailers, one from Ron DeSantis, one from Nikki Haley, both sort of kind of indicate of what I think this race is starting to boil down to. And we talked earlier, guys, about how the TV ads seem to really be hitting immigration pretty hard right now. I've seen immigration ads from President Trump, Governor DeSantis, Tim Scott's got one out. I want to say maybe even I saw a Vivek ad, but I'm not sure what that one was about. But and I've also heard just anecdotally from the campaigns that immigration is really polling sky high among Republican primary voters. So the first one here is Governor DeSantis.
It just like small point of clarification, because we make sure to draw these lines.
What I do wrong?
Well, both pieces are I think PAC or
okay.
It's neither piece is from the campaign of that individual. Just to be clear.
Yes,
that's all.
I appreciate that clarification. And if the FEC or the IRS wants to, bring it on. We've now clarified that. Although we could even do another episode on changing campaign finance laws and how so much more of these campaigns are being run through sort of ancillary organizations and C4s and super PACs, and less on the hard dollar sign. But so just kind of a sample of the messaging. Ron DeSantis served overseas defending our nation during the Iraq surge. Picture of him in uniform holding his rifle. You've got pictures of drug use and drug trading and how some of his record and what seems to be on his campaign ad is on using lethal force at the southern border. I would leave them stone cold dead, which is a quote from him in the debate. So, John, what's your perspective on immigration? I know you've been waiting to talk about this for a while. Is this the primary issue in this race?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there's so many policy disasters to point to with this administration. I think the biggest one has been immigration, where you literally have an open border, and you have millions of people that have been flooding in. And look at just what's happening in New York, when you have people literally protesting in the streets about the influx of illegal immigration, and there's so many problems with this. And a nation that doesn't have a border is not a nation.
Correct.
And so there's national security factors. There's also the flood of illegal people that are breaking our laws, that are bringing with them a bunch of unintended consequences of drug trafficking and human trafficking, and so it's not just border security, but it also brings up cultural problems. We're seeing this in Europe. When you just flood your nation with massive immigration, it creates a ton of problems from a cultural perspective, because we're not assimilating people, and we've forgotten how important assimilation is. The other thing is economics. You bring in flood immigrants into your country, you drive down wages, and it hurts the middle class, it hurts the lower class as well. And so you have an interesting dynamic within immigration, where you have on one side sort of the corporate elite that wants more immigration because it drives down wages and it's a cheap source of labor, and then you have those on the left and some on the right and some libertarians that embrace basically very liberal immigration. And so I think we need a policy of not just of securing our border, but actually looking at ways to limit immigration. And I think one of the best examples, you're not going to be shocked at this, but look what they did in the 1920s. They passed a good law that limited immigration and really got back to assimilation and bringing people back in and trying to Americanize them. And I think one thing that Governor DeSantis did that was good was E-Verify in Florida. I mean, and businesses should be punished that are knowingly hiring illegal immigrants. And I think President Trump had done a good job on immigration, and even some in the Republican Party threw roadblocks when he was trying to build the wall, and so I think this is a huge issue. It's very important. The other thing is people are frustrated because I looked today, $114 billion to Ukraine. There are members of Congress who are more concerned about the borders in Ukraine than about our own border.
I would suggest it's quite possible that a majority of members of Congress.
Yes, and
we have
Zelensky,
found bipartisan agreement in DC these days, and it's Ukraine. You guys,
Zelensky's in DC right now with the shakedown.
Right.
He's bringing it to town.
And Biden is proposing $24 billion more to give to Zelensky in terms of aid. And
for context, that's roughly 3 times the annual budget of the state of Iowa.
Yes,
it's a lot of money.
Yeah, but nobody cares about our southern border. I mean, there's literally an invasion going on, and I have to give credit to the Republican governors. Like Governor Abbott, who's doing his best to secure his own state, and even Governor Reynolds. I mean, people have criticized our governor, but she has sent resources to help Governor Abbott, as well as the governor understands that the illegal immigration doesn't just stop in Texas; it affects all of our states. Through drug trafficking and all sorts of reasons.
Yep. No, I think it's right. I agree with you, John. I think that immigration for the last however many cycles seems like it's this issue that sort of percolates under the surface. And as you get closer to an election, all of a sudden campaigns wake up that this is something that folks really care about, and then they start speaking to it. And we've seen it happened and gave us President Trump almost 8 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just, but there's this, but it doesn't get talked about a lot. And maybe that drives the interest in it, is because it doesn't get talked about very much. You were going to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was voters rallied around President Trump in 2016 because of number of issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you're going to say what was the singular issue, or the biggest issue, the biggest draw, I think, was immigration, and frankly, the way he addressed it was build the wall.
Yeah.
And I have said many times that I don't see the issue of immigration quite like John does. And that's okay that we can have disagreements. John still, I think, likes me personally and stuff. But I don't disagree with everything he said either. And the reality is I think we need to have a secure border, right? Whether it's President Trump's build the wall strategy or not, we need to have a border that does not let people just walk into this country, either literally or figuratively. Like, it needs to be secure. Whoever and however many people we decide to let in, we need to know who those people are. We need to have some level of vetting. We need to make sure they are not bringing, I'll just broadly say, anything else into the country with them. And there is a long way to go, and a lot of progress could be made before you reach the point where John and I are starting to have the debate over, is this right? Do we need to go further? Is that enough? And so, if John and I represent chunks of the Republican Party, because that's really who we're talking about in the primary, right? I think it's an issue that they may want to get to work on, because again, plenty of progress to be made before John and I would diverge on the issue. So
yeah, shifting gears a little bit, the sort of national security, foreign policy issue that I thought was going to be talked about more than I think it has so far is the issue of China. And so Nikki Haley has a flyer here, and her TV ads have reflected this as well, is strength with regard to China. Chinese espionage, trade policy. I'm sure, John, that you could go on at lengths about, what we need and have talked about. But I'm going to ask you for a little bit more of I back up. The mailer makes an assertion here, which I think is interesting from a policy standpoint that merits some reflection. The Chinese hacking of Western companies represents the greatest transfer of wealth in history. Made me stop and think about it. There have been some pretty great transfers of wealth in human history, but just in terms of raw dollars, I don't see any reason not to say that's correct.
That's an interesting way to put it. I've never seen it that way, but I would argue that part of the reason they've been able to do that is we have allowed them to steal our technology through our disastrous trade policies and mainly giving them most favored nation status. And we were told by the elites in both parties that it would democratize China and it would make them a global player and they were going to play by the rules, and that never happened. And one thing that concerns me, Chris, is there's a lot of rhetoric about China in this campaign by all the candidates. Mm-hmm. And I would like to see all of them really address, they talk about balance of trade with China, but so many of them are dismissive of the tariff. And that's fine. We can have a debate over tariffs, and I'd welcome that. But I would argue that
might be an
how can you address our massive trade deficits with China without tariffs? And I would ask that to Ambassador Haley and Senator Scott that have been critical of President Trump's 10% across-the-board tariff and even the Trump tariffs, because you cannot simply expect China to play by the rules and then say, well, we'll have the rules-based order corrected. That's not that has failed for decades, and so that's where I'm concerned about with where Haley and Scott and some of these other candidates are. They're not, they don't want to mention tariffs at all, and I think. And we could get into what Ambassador Lighthizer wrote in the Wall Street Journal, but I think that was one of Trump's most successful policies.
I want to pivot off of that, John, because I think this is a good spot to do it. And we don't have a lot of time left. But, you talked about the old rule, the old order and the rules-based system. And so you had sent an article that was in Fox News on their power rankings of GOP presidential candidates, frontrunner, ranking them out. And interestingly, in the article, they sort of try and draw a distinction between populism and conservatism and maybe which candidates fall into which bucket. My perspective, and I guess where maybe I'm pivoting here, is that I'm not sure they got the definition of each quite right, like I would enjoy. I think sometimes they peg as conservative in here those that want the old way of doing things, sort of a George W. Bush conservatism, rather than modern conservatism. And why can't we go back to the way we did it before Donald Trump or whatever shift the populist. And so I don't know if you see it that way, but I want to give you a chance to kind of talk about that distinction. And frankly, they try and is it just easier to just call it the America First agenda rather than populist conservatism?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. These terms have become muddled, and even America First has become unclear because it can mean different things to different people. But when I looked at that poll, what I took away is that the top three candidates, which would have been Trump, DeSantis, and Vivek. Pardon me. I all three of those are the leading, what you would call America First candidates, or that at least are sympathetic to the America First agenda. And some people have labeled that the new right. I would actually call it the old right, because the ideas of America First are not new. I mean, these are, and we've talked about this before, but these are ideas that Republicans had supported since even Abraham Lincoln, when the party was first formed. And so, but I think this is where the people stand, at least within the Republican base, is that they're not, they don't want to go back to the Bush, the Romney, the McCain type of Republican Party or conservatism. We were talking about immigration at the beginning of the program. They want something done about this. People do not want, and I agree with you, Chris, about Trump and build the wall being a slogan, but I actually think that his biggest appeal was America First. And a lot of people resonated with that by saying, it's time for the government to put us first. And just like in trade policy, both parties did not care that factories were outsourced, and they basically said, well, if you lost your job as a steel worker, too bad, go and learn computer programming, move to the city. And that there's nothing conservative about that. And so I think the America First label is appealing to a lot of Republicans because, and we had a meeting when Trump was running, and remember that old gentleman stood up and he said, Trump is the first politician to fight for me, and I think people are translating that idea with America First.
I think there's an element of, it's almost style a little bit, is that populist vibe is that someone is a fighter.
Yes, yeah.
And willing to upset the order, to drain the swamp, to take on the entrenched powers, to be anti-establishment. I almost wonder if that idea sort of transcends all of it, because there is a lot of overlap between paleoconservatism and populism and whatever. There are, and so I think sometimes smart people get a little too hung up on trying to put everything into nice, clean buckets, and really take the time to visit with average Americans, like what's driving their thought process here.
I mean, look at Governor Reynolds connecting with Iowans, and she delivers on what she promises to do. And one could say DeSantis is doing the same thing in Florida, where people are resonating with what sort of these conservative governors are doing. They're responding to the people's agenda, and we talked about Pence in his speech condemning populism, and I just think he's flat out wrong on that. I mean,
we know you do, John.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I believe that the The Republican nominee for president will be the individual that can most credibly and authentically and forcefully convey strength and a willingness to fight for the country and for the people.
Yep.
You know, whether you agree with them on every policy or not. And so far in this race, it looks like that person is President Trump.
Yeah.
Could change. We're a long ways out. But I think that's what any of these folks need to be able to communicate to Republican primary voters.
Yeah. One of my favorite ads in the last, election when Governor Reynolds was running for re-election was when, I don't know if you guys remember, she emerged out of the coffee shop and they had played and she said, you know, all this insanity that's going on across the nation with the riots and all that stuff. And people, she was absolutely right. With all the insanity that's going on in this country, people are wanting something of policies with common sense and just fighting for basic American values. And that's exactly what our governor has done.
Yep.
And I don't know how many people I've talked to out of state that said, boy, I wish Kim Reynolds was running because I really like your governor. And it's really encouraging to hear people say that because she has fought for common sense policies and fighting to protect traditional values in a complex world that's getting more crazy by the minute with some of the insanity. I mean, whoever thought that we would have to debate who could use a bathroom? I mean, this is insane stuff. I mean, that's going on.
Well, we agree, and we certainly appreciate Governor Reynolds for all that. And I think that's a good reminder, John, I guess, as we move to sign off on a little bit different note, but our prayers are with Governor Reynolds and the first gentleman, Kevin, today, as they announced that he's been diagnosed with lung cancer. And I don't know if you saw that, Chris. So that they're going to begin treatment and, you know, they give a little bit of an optimistic tone through that, but obviously that's never a good thing. And quote from that the governor made: "Kevin has been my anchor throughout our 41 years of marriage, and I will be the same for him as he begins treatment. We are blessed to be surrounded by a loving family and a community of prayer warriors. We know God is with us on this journey." So amen to that, Governor, and we will absolutely pray for you and your family and for Kevin. So anyway,
Indeed.
So with that, John, thank you for many thoughts on issues that I know are near and dear to you today. So we got that covered. And thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. Don't forget to leave us a positive review. And,
just one quick thing, but sure. I was reading a book the other night, and America First, actually, some Democrats used that in the early 20th century. So it wasn't, it's not the extreme that it is not. Yeah, that people think it is.
It is not.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And with that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.